Va bene, dai, va bene, facciamo questa cosa, visto che siamo in coda per Overwatch, dai. Allora, metto just chatting. Adesso scrivo facciamo roba pazzesca in coda per Overwatch 2, ok? La chiamo così la live, ok? Io vi voglio avvertire, ok? Il mio amico è riuscito a salire a 50.000, perfetto. Allora io esco e rientro da Overwatch nel frattempo. Metto la categoria just chatting, perché tanto ormai, a quanto abbiamo capito, si va per le lunghe. Allora chat, se siete interessati a Overwatch 2, anche io, ma non funziona una minchia, quindi ripiego un attimo mentre cerco comunque di entrare su Overwatch 2, su una cosa stranissima che è quello di cui stavo parlando ora. È un video di Internet Historian, uno celeberrimo, ed è l'ultimo video e forse anche uno dei suoi migliori. Ed è una trama, ok? È una storia vera, è una ricostruzione di una storia vera. Aspetta che vi faccio vedere una roba. No, ok. Mi ha illuso Overwatch. Quando ho riloggato mi ha fatto in coda davanti a te 4. E ho pensato 4 persone davanti a me? È crashato subito dopo. È crashato immediatamente. Quindi niente, falso allarme. Dicevo, una ricostruzione storica di questo man in a cave, ok? Che non è nulla di più di quello che vi ho detto, però il numero di plot twist in questa storiella è insensato, totalmente insensato. E io non l'ho visto, volevo vederlo con voi, ma già nei primi 10 minuti di questa storiella c'è un numero di plot twist fuori di testa, è raccontato benissimo, è strano, è creepy. Vediamolo e vediamo un po' anche che cazzo fare con sto cazzo di Overwatch 2 nel frattempo. Allora io direi, per vederlo mi metto in questa scena qui, direi, anziché nel just shooting. Ciao Ago. Il grande bluff di Overwatch 2 è raccontato benissimo, assolutamente. Come faccio a metterlo? Io devo mettere Overwatch 2 di qua, vero? E poi devo mettere questa cosa a schermo intero, va bene? Facciamo così. Allora, man in a cave. Man in a fucking cave, ragazzi. Ok. Lo metto qua. C'è Runbow gratis su Epic da scaricare e giocare mentre si aspetta. Non ho idea di cosa tu abbia detto e ne sono contentissimo. Plum plum plum. Questi siete voi? Quello sono io? Ciao. Vi metto sull'altro schermo però. Allora, voi capite bene che un video è infinitamente strano quando letteralmente l'inizio del video è una impostazione dei settaggi di luminosità. Per cui va bene. Grazie Apocalypse, grazie di 50. 30k di coda da PS5. Se cerca fine coda si fa notte fino a domani. Vediamo. Il mio consiglio è continuare a uscire e rientrare. A me ha funzionato KW. Vabbè, dai, adesso io intanto faccio partire il video e poi nel frattempo io cerco di entrare su Overwatch. Chat, vediamo. Questa è una delle cose più strane di sempre.
In the state of Kentucky.
E ovviamente dovrò mettere i sottotitoli perché giustamente ce ne sono magari di... No, ci sono quelli generati automaticamente, va bene? Perché giustamente alcuni di voi magari non masticano bene l'inglese, bla bla. Questa è una follia. Io non l'ho visto, non mi fate spoiler, perché tanto è meraviglioso. Ho visto i primi 15 minuti però, e già i primi 15 minuti valevano super la pena.
There is a cave.
In the state of Kentucky there is a cave
That every now and then demands a sacrifice. January 30th, 1925. A man walks towards the cave with a kerosene lamp in his hand.
Storia vera, eh? Non è una di quelle spooky story sui fantasmi, non è una di quelle robe lì, d'accordo? Quindi io non vedrei mai una roba così cringe, ok?
He hangs up his jacket and ducks into a 5-foot opening. The inside of the cave is narrow. He has to drop down on his hands and knees, crawling through a passageway filled with jagged rocks and choking dust. Then down a chute he had cleared out months earlier. All of the daylight is gone from here, and this lantern is his only source of light. Ignoring the loose limestone rocks perched directly above him, he is now 100 feet in, and here he reaches the turnaround room.
The turnaround
now, they call
room.
this the turnaround room because this is the juncture where even experienced cavers say, no thanks, and turn around. Because to continue on means going through this, the squeeze, a gap in the stone of only 9 inches. For reference, here's a subway sub. Going through, he would look...
Perché? E qua già la mia prima domanda. Perché? Perché uno dovrebbe fare questa cosa? Perché uno dovrebbe andare nel 1925 armato solo di una lanterna? Perché uno dovrebbe prendere e andare in una caverna, pulire un cazzo di tubo fondamentalmente in una caverna, e poi alla fine della caverna, alla fine di questo primo percorso della caverna, infilarsi in un cazzo di buco largo meno di un panino. Lo so che lo spiega dopo, ma puttana di una puttana.
Going through, he would look exactly like this. His arms will need to be completely at their side, and he will need to exhale so that he can reduce the size of his torso. Gradually, bit by bit, he disappears into the hole.
Pardon,
His
tolgo
clothes
quello
are
che...
caught on sharp gypsum crystals, hooking into him and threatening to hold him in place. But using his feet like paddles, he pushes through. He reaches a wider opening at the other side, then crawls.
The real guy.
Using his feet like paddles.
Ve lo faccio rivedere. Questa è la faccia di ricostruzione, perché Internet Historian, per chi non lo conoscesse, fa delle ricostruzioni mettendo i pupazzetti di questo tipo, e chiaramente per questo caso, che è del 1925, non ci sono le facce vere. C'è un suo video che è anche sulla Costa Concordia. Una ricostruzione migliore di quella di qualsiasi telegiornale italiano, e lì metteva anche la faccia di Schettino, però giustamente questa è del 25, le facce di quelli del 25 non ce l'abbiamo, quindi ha preso degli attori amici e ci ha messo le loro facce per rendere l'idea della trama.
He reaches a wider opening at the...
Questo è The Real Guy, un po' più bruttino, solo però per dire che è la storia vera.
other side, then crawls forward towards a ledge. Illuminated here is a 10-foot drop. A rope is already secured around a boulder, which allows him to rappel down. His worn-out leather shoes touch the ground.
Chi ha fatto la foto vedrai,
This is as
Crash.
far as he can go, and it is time for work to begin. What he is working on is another opening. At the moment, it's too small for anyone to fit through, but he will chip away at it until he can shove himself right through the other side. Because on the other side is this. A magnificent and otherworldly cave structure that will be irresistible to tourists. Every day for months he has been removing rocks from this crevice. To him, this is all just routine. So he eases further into the gap. Carefully he contorts his body through, Rocks compress the sides of his torso, so close that his arms are pinned to the side of his body. He once again paddles his feet to inch down. Then, about halfway, he stops. The lantern. It's starting to dim. He will need to go all the way back to the surface to refuel the thing. He sighs. He slowly shuffles back out, pushing the lantern with his shoulder. Then, oh no. Ding, crack, darkness. He has knocked over the lamp, and it has broken. Now, the man didn't panic. He had been caught in the dark before, and he could make his way back by feel alone.
Per carità, non basta così poco.
So he continues worming out, leveraging his foot against what he thinks is the cave wall. But that is not the cave wall. That is in fact a rock protruding from the ceiling. As soon as he puts his weight against the rock, it breaks loose. A solid piece weighing 15 kilograms lands directly on his ankle. It aches. But he's okay. It doesn't feel as though his ankle is broken, just badly bruised and caught underneath the rock. So he shuffles to move the rock away. Suddenly, gravel. A lot of gravel. It falls onto his feet, his legs, his torso, and the weight of it all forces the wedged rock deeper into the gap underneath his foot.
Aspetta, Wolfere.
Pinned. He tries to push forward. He cannot. He tries to inch backwards. He cannot. He is stuck. This is Sand Cave. This man is Floyd Collins. He is trapped in absolute darkness, 60 feet deep below the earth, all of his limbs held in place at the very bottom of this.
Adesso, questo video dura 1 ora e 9 minuti. Io lo so che voi pensate di sapere come va avanti o come finisce o come prosegue questa storia. Vi sbagliate, a meno che non conosciate la storia. Se non conoscete la storia di sta roba qua, il numero di plot twist ogni 5 minuti per tutta la durata di quest'ora e 9 minuti è insane. È insano. Questo è niente, questa intro è nulla. Arrivano gli alieni? Ti giuro, ieri che avrei... già solo intorno al 15 minuti, che è fino a dove ho visto io, avrei probabilmente avuto più chance dicendo arrivano gli alieni. È insane, è fatto fuori di testa. Già il fatto che non sia finita qui per me è un enorme plot twist. Avevo capito, Nico. È una storia e comunque qualcuno deve averla pur raccontata, no? Quindi evidentemente non può finire qua con il tizio rimasto incastrato. Buona. Dov'è finito Floyd e non c'è più, basta. Ma è una storia vera, è tutta una storia vera, Ago. È tutta una storia vera, è una storia vera molto famosa, tra l'altro.
But before I tell you what happens next, ad time. Speaking of people
Ad time, che skipperò perché va bene. Vediamo un po' fino a dove dura. Ok, vai. Ma la domanda è: come porca ha trovato sta caverna infilata così a caso? Adesso ti racconta tutto. Overwatch nel frattempo 0.
No.
0.
Get it.
Add over.
Collins is still in the dark, unable to move. His left arm was pinned underneath his torso, his right wedged by the rock ceiling above. Beneath him, sharp crystal shards dug into his skin. Ice thawed, traced across the ceiling, and dripped down directly onto his face, pooling underneath him. The water was a consistent 54 degrees. Floyd tried to breathe calmly in the concentrated dark. When he did attempt to shuffle, more gravel and rocks would tumble from above and pile onto his feet, so nothing would work. He clawed at the cave walls till his fingertips were bloody, and he realized that there was only one option left. Call out for help. But wait. Who is Floyd, and why did he even go into a dangerous cave?
Oh, bravo.
Floyd
Chi
has
è?
been exploring the caves of Kentucky since he was merely 6 years old. And as he grew up, he gained a reputation for being a very daring caver. He would dive into some hole on one side of town and emerge miles away on someone else's property.
Sup?
He
Sup?
grew up and he became embroiled in the Kentucky Cave Wars. Now, there's way too much to go into here, but the summary version is there's this huge network of interconnected caves called
Sì,
Mammoth
Shiva.
Caves. It's actually the largest cave system in the world. And there's a city right in the middle of it. Cave City, real name. So, of course, there are dozens of cave entrances on private property all
Cave City. Ma come Cave City? Come fa a essere real name Cave City? Deve essere tipo Merdor, che è il modo in cui noi chiamiamo Busto Arsizio, che è qua vicino. Non può essere Cave City davvero. Non esiste davvero Merdor. È un nome, no, del popolo, no? Invece no.
over the place. Now, farmland in this region has very poor soil, and things do not grow well here. So, cave tourism as a source of
No, lo
income
so che esiste davvero.
quickly became the prominent thing.
È quello che dico.
However, a problem. There are
Va
a
bene, Ago.
very large number of caves, but there are only a limited number of tourists. So competition rapidly escalated. Visit my cave. No. Visit my cave.
Venite alla
Big
mia
sign to
cava,
erect
no,
and say,
andate alla
tourists,
mia
come to me.
cava, la
Mine
mia
is
caverna.
definitely
Venite a
open,
vedere la
mine is
mia
the best.
caverna.
But then competitors would respond by saying, hey, by the way, we're open, but don't go to that one over there. It's really shitty. In fact,
Cioè, voi immaginate quanto si annoiavano? Quanto si annoiava l'uomo medio nel 1925? Che andava lì e di questo è un buco. Wow! Il mio intrattenimento per quest'anno è risolto. Quello è un buco.
just dangerous. This kept going further. By the end, they were blocking off the trail to each other's property, beating each other in the streets, and hiring people called cappers.
Ma soprattutto il mio buco è più bello del suo buco. Cioè, il buco, una caverna, non è neanche qualcosa da vedere. È una assenza di qualcosa. E un'assenza di qualcosa, cioè il buco, è sufficiente a giustificare traffico e turismo nel Kentucky. Quanto si annoiavano nel Kentucky? Cristo! Boh.
Dress up as policemen and tell tourists, no, you can't go in there. That what? No, it's illegal. Despite the fierce competition,
Ma
Floyd
Cubo,
found a cave on
Cubo non sputerei mai sulla speleologia, ma non è questo, non è questo. Questi sono gli ingressi di un buco e basta, non c'è tutto il fascino di questa è una pietra di un certo tipo, questo c'ha 4.000 anni. No, buco, questi sono buchi, fine.
his property and he started advertising it to tourists.
Sono stato anch'io a visitare le grotte, ma serio, e mi sono piaciute praticamente quasi tutte quelle che ho visto. Tra stalattiti, stalagmiti, robe, formazioni fuori di testa, ma non è questo, ok? Non è questo.
Aim. All right, he thought. What if I found something really special and unique? Then surely people would have to come to my cave to see it. So,
Paradossalmente
he
è quello che sta
kept
cercando
exploring and
lui.
exploring, until he found this hollow.
Questo, cioè quello che sta cercando lui in particolare, non è solo un buco, è una vera e propria, tra virgolette, caverna, una grotta vera e propria, con anche roba. Cose che hanno a che fare appunto con la speleologia, con quel tipo di turismo che può attirare sicuramente. Però per arrivarci, problemigno.
It was filled with big
I
gypsum
sassi.
crystals, and when you were in there, it felt like a completely alien world. but it was barely accessible. This small tunnel is the only way in. He would need to dig for months to open it up to tourists, but he knew he could do it. Back to the competition. They knew the value of this cave. They knew the potential, they wanted it for themselves, and they wanted Collins gone. One time, 5 of them just wandered onto Floyd's property and demanded he hand over the lease. When he refused, they just started beating the shit out of him. This only stopped when Floyd's brother, Homer, marched out with a shotgun and chased them all off. But Floyd was not deterred. He spent 12 hours a day, every day, for months, clearing gravel and stone, chipping away at that passage. He would open it up to tourists, make his cave an incredible attraction, and make his dreams come true.
E invece...
Hey! Is anyone there?
So there's Floyd in the dark, yelling out for help. He's at the start of a very tiring loop. Sleep, wake, yell. Sleep, wake, yell. Hours passed. His voice gave in. Arms tingled numb. Pain radiating up his ankle. Here he remained in the dark for the next 23 hours. Quickly you might wonder, how come no one's come for him after 23 hours? Well, Sand Cave resides on a 200-acre farm.
Con la goccia in
There are
testa.
several homes on this property with...
Con la goccia in testa? No, Direwolf, non con la goccia in testa. Con la goccia in testa, con oltre metà del corpo in una pozzanghera di circa 12 gradi di temperatura, con la gamba schiacciata completamente da un sasso da 30 kg, non mi ricordo quanto è. Sì, è completamente immobile, senza né mangiare né bere.
With other families. One of them, of course, is Collins' house, where Floyd's father, Lee, resides. Now, Lee
15
and Floyd
kg, 33
constantly
libbre,
get
ok.
into fights about how to run things.
È completamente
Lee
al
wants
buio.
his son to concentrate on farming, and Floyd wants to concentrate on cave tourism. Arguments would often get heated. And Lee was also a bit of a drunk. It was doubtful that he would even notice if his son Floyd was missing. Also not helping things, Floyd regularly lodged at 2 other homes on the farm. So when he didn't return to one host, they would presume that he was staying with the other. And, even worse than that, he had recently spent 30 hours in a cave. So disappearing for this length of time wasn't seen as abnormal. Regardless, around the 23-hour mark, a few locals started to suspect that, hey, something might be wrong, and they went to check up on him. And here, they spotted his jacket, still hung up. Unusual. They went deeper. However, there was only one person small enough to make it as far as the turnaround room. This was a 17-year-old Jewel Estes. He refused to go into the squeeze, but it was close enough to call Collins' name.
Floyd!
Floyd!
And Collins yelled back.
I'm here.
Estes emerges from the cave.
Okay,
Howard
we know he's trapped,
24.
and we know where he is.
So, locals started to gather outside. Out of my way. Say a bunch of men who would each show up and take turns heading into the
Va
cave
bene, Iero.
in an attempt to reach Collins. But once they reached the turnaround room,
Nope. Nope. Nope.
they would fail to reach him, emerging from the cave, soaked in mud and cursing. Out of my way, they would say as they were heading in the reverse direction. So a few more hours passed. Word would spread around town. Dozens of locals from Cave City
Floyd, è
started to
incastrato
gather
nella
outside.
caverna. Floyd è incastrato. Floyd in a cave.
Over in Louisville, Floyd's 22-year-old brother.
È il
Hope,
cognome
he gets
Collins,
a phone
Levendy. Non so se era una battuta
hello?
terribile.
I see. Ah, my brother. He's trapped in a cave? I'm on my way.
Homer jumps on a coach and makes his way to Floyd's cave.
Per me si incastrano tutti per aiutarlo. Io vi giuro che non riuscirete a capire come va avanti sta roba.
Dozens of men are standing around outside.
Ve lo giuro.
He ignores them all and marches right into the cavern, still wearing his city clothes.
To
He
Cave
makes his
City,
way
mamma mia.
down the chute, through the narrowing passages, down on his hands and knees towards the turnaround room. and when he arrives, he does not hesitate. He squeezes into the hole, scrambles his way through to the ledge on the other side. He sees Floyd below and slides down to meet him.
Floyd!
Bro!
It probably wasn't that casual.
Oh, thank God you're here.
Homer took a moment to shine his light around the area and assess the situation. It was not good. This rock formation is going to prove almost impossible to work around. Alright, so let's have a look. Floyd is here. The rock is here, pinning his ankle. He's surrounded by rubble, and there's a pocket of gravel above him ready to fall. However, because this opening is so small, there are only two viable ways of reaching Floyd and that gravel. Option 1, the most obvious, feet first. But if you do this, you have to kind of squat, and your own torso obstructs access to the rubble. Otherwise, option 2, come down head first. That will give you better access, but you're trying to move hundreds of pounds of gravel upside down. Worse yet, there's barely an inch around Collins on either side, so good luck getting your arm down near Floyd's ankle to actually free him from the wedged rock. Homer calls back to the less daring rescuers standing behind him.
Quickly, some food and drink.
They send it through.
Certo,
He
Sid.
hand-feeds his brother a pint of coffee and a total of 9 sausage sandwiches.
Feeling better?
Much better.
Then, Homer went.
Allora, Kentucky, 1925. Non bevi da 30 ore? 38 ore? Non bevi da 38 ore. Non mangi da altrettanto tempo, va bene. 9 va bene, 9 hot dog praticamente, d'accordo. Gli danno da bere del cazzo di caffè. Ma dell'acqua. Ma perché, perché non dell'acqua? Della normalissima acqua, non la bevono in Kentucky l'acqua. 9 sausages. Ma è caffè americano. Mi è chiaro. Però
To task. He began removing rocks and gravel, tiny scoop at a time, with the help of an old syrup can. For the next 8 hours he toiled, first with hands, then, once enough was cleared, using a crowbar to scoop behind his brother, scraping away sharp protrusions as he went. It was slow progress. Virtually futile. As soon as he removed one rock or scoop of gravel, another would tumble from above and land in the new absence.
merda.
And it was exhausting work. By sunrise, Homer's arms and back were knackered. His lungs burned. He was losing hope. Homer emerged hours later, shivering violently, skin bruised from his fingertips, but the cave barely yielded at all. However, something new. By the time Homer reached outside, he was greeted by a sea of approximately 100 men and women standing around, drinking, squabbling, and talking big game about how they too were going to save Floyd.
Sì, sì. Però
The
intanto
press was
stanno
also
fuori,
present
capito?
to help people gawk from afar. Now, Homer recuperated at a small tent near the cave's mouth.
E intanto sono 47 ore. 47 ore che quello sta steso, incastrato. Fuori se la canta e se la bevono.
Strangers immediately crowded around him to ask innocent but
Sì, ci
frankly,
sono i Peaky Blinders.
frustrating
Ci sono i Peaky Blinders perché è difficile ricostruire, no? Quindi Yaksha, grazie mille. Vedo che anche qui la situazione server è la stessa. Baci frizzanti, ciao my friend. Sì.
and offer unsolicited, obvious advice, as well as wildly impractical solutions. He should try untying his shoes, said one. No, we should send him down with a contortionist who's got a mallet and a chisel. We should jerk him off, right, guys? All right, I made that thing
Credo.
down. But you get the idea. And they started to argue with each other about their plans. Hey, how about using dynamite? One clique formed, insisting that
Certo.
was a great idea. And another
Certo,
saying,
un bel
no,
gruppone.
the explosion
Un bel gruppone che voleva usare la dinamite. Certo, perché che cosa può andare storto se metti un candelotto di dinamite lì? Cosa può succedere? Non può succedere niente. America! Fuck yeah!
Will kill him, and the weight of the new rocks will surely crush him. They fought for a while until they started arguing about gas torches, which will cook him or
Gas torches. Come fa a essere un'idea? Gas torches, come fa?
asphyxiate him or the gas will poison him, but by far the most common suggestion, of course, was amputation. Never mind that the foot itself was unreachable, and never mind what the blood loss and shock would do to Floyd's weakened body, and never minding even more that Floyd was strongly reluctant to the idea.
Whatever you do, don't cut my foot off.
All of the squabble would not have gotten on Homer's nerves, except that not one of them would just brave the damn cave and continue shoveling away the gravel.
Solo chiacchiere. Io sono arrivato fino a qua a vedere. Tutto quello che c'è da questo momento in poi per me è totalmente nuovo. Io veramente non ho idea del numero di plot twist, sono sicuro che ce ne saranno 50.000. Però nessuno che entra. Chiacchierano, dicono, ipotizzano, ma nessuno che va ad aiutare sto cazzo di Homer per salvare Floyd.
Formula was always the same. Brave heroes go in with food and supplies, then reach the turnaround room and immediately lose their nerve.
Rega,
then
non lo
dump
so,
the
man.
food just outside the hole, and then return back outside and go, oh, absolutely. No, he says, thanks for the food. Thank you so much. Yum, yum. No one would go through that squeeze. Dozens more men would try.
Certo che obiettivamente a vedere la ricostruzione non tanto, ma se vedi la foto arrivano, no? Food and supplies, poi arrivano al buco.
Immediately lose their nerve, then dump the food just outside the hole, and then return back outside and go, oh, absolutely. No, he says, thanks for the food. Thank you so much. Yum, yum. No one would go through that squeeze.
Però, cioè, questa è la dimensione di una lattina, questo è il buco, insomma. Cioè, li sto biasimando, però non li sto biasimando così tanto come dovrei, forse, Non li sto biasimando tantissimo, perché questa è una cazzo di bottiglia a caso, più larga del buco, cioè, è veramente... Sicuramente prospettiva, Zeff, però è comunque un buco da la grandezza di un panino.
Dozens more men would try. All of them would fail.
Ora 60...
February
71?
2nd, 9 a.m. So far, Homer has been the only person to have reached Floyd. And that would continue to be true until here we are at the Louisville Courier. There's a spirited young newshawk named William Miller.
William
He's talking to his
Miller.
boss, and he's trying to convince him that it's a great idea for him to cover the story of the man trapped in the cave.
Listen up, boss. I'm hearing talk of a man in a cave. He's stuck down there, and I want to get down there too. Get to the nitty-gritty, you hear?
This is an opportunity for some good PR, Miller. I'm in. But I want us to sponsor that rescue. Picture this. Man saved from cave by Louisville Courier, the finest newspaper in the state. That'll drum up plenty of business.
24-carat idea, boss.
Va
I'll make
bene.
it happen. I'll get down there toot sweet.
So off Miller goes to Floyd's cave.
Cazzo, cioè pur di fare un servizio
Back over at the
giornalistico
cave,
va ad aiutarlo,
Homer
va a
is sitting
salvarlo.
outside, trying to recuperate. As Miller wanders up, he glares at the man in his city clothes and answers every question with either a grunt or a one-word answer.
Yeah. Sure.
Finally, he gestures to Sand Cave.
Listen,
Miller.
you want more information? The hole's right behind me. Why don't you go take a look yourself?
Now, Miller is only 21, but he is a slender and determined man. He takes on the challenge. So he removes his suit, drapes himself in coveralls.
Capito, chat? È il 1925. Miller ha 21 anni. È un uomo. Mica come voi, mocciosi puzzosi di latte carogne.
And grabs a lamp. Miller slowly enters the cave. He finds himself stepping in puddles and having to correct his balance against the ever-softening walls. These were accumulating problems thanks to the gawkers outside who had lit campfires all around the entrance. That caused snowmelt, and the stable environment of the cave is starting to shift. But Miller makes it further than most. And all that's left is that final squeeze, and he's there. He stops. He takes a moment and decides to call out to Floyd.
Floyd!
Hearing there is someone on the other side, he feels ashamed not to try, so he closes his eyes and moves forward. His slender figure begins inching through. The crystal gypsum cuts into his elbows and tugs at his clothes. He gets snagged. He's spluttering through the pools of muddy water. He stops, collects himself, and pushes on. He can barely inhale. If he gets stuck in here, he can only hope that someone else can come in from behind and pull him out by the legs.
Mamma
but
mia.
eventually, he makes it through. Fantastic. He's now standing on the edge of a 10-foot pit, and he clumsily bumbles his way down.
Bella.
He sat right next to Floyd, ready to interview him. But Floyd didn't really answer any of his questions.
Ma come ready to interview him? Cioè lui si è fatto veramente tutto sto giro per andare da lui col taccuino. Ma è un pazzo! Ready to interview him in che senso? Ma è incastrato qua da 80 ore! Come interview him? Scava! Scava, dagli una mano, come interview him?
In fact, he was incoherent. At the moment, he is sitting in a pool of water that is 12 degrees, slowly sapping his body temperature. He is dying from exposure. The cold is diminishing Floyd's mental faculties, and he can barely make sentences. So Miller took a few mental notes, and he left. He worked his way back through the squeeze, past the turnaround room, and out into the daylight. He is covered in mud and scratches and numb head to toe. And when Homer saw, his hope reignited. Someone else had made it to Floyd.
You and me. Together, we can get Floyd out of there.
Perché lui ci passa però, cioè la parte importante è che lui ci passa effettivamente. Quindi adesso Homer non è più da solo, c'ha almeno un altro comparuzzo, però siamo alla 75esima ora e non hanno neanche iniziato a cercare di salvarlo, cioè. Simo, se vuoi provare a loggare Overwatch 2 accedi dal server asiatico. Gian, va bene, va bene. In realtà al momento sono in coda con 40.000 persone davanti, ma sta andando. Se mi fallisce questo tentativo provo, però tanto ormai sono presissimo da sto video, Gian, quindi
If Miller hadn't gone to that cave, there's a good chance that Floyd's story would have remained an
ottimo
obscure
suggerimento, Gian,
footnote
grazie
in the
mille.
back pages. But the interviews and first-person accounts gave the audience a glimpse of something real. Fear, hope, desperation, the full range. And so from Los Angeles to New York, Floyd's story was picked up everywhere and described the Kentucky man's plight in sensational detail. It was also the era when radio became a regular
holy
feature
shit,
for
fa il
regular
giro
Americans.
degli
Radio
Stati
allowed
Uniti sta
something
roba.
new, hourly updates, letting people get engrossed into the story. So, mostly thanks to Miller, the story of Floyd over the next week would grow and grow, seemingly frothing over into every aspect of American life. The press at large would be clamoring over each other for every little extra scrap of detail they could get about Floyd. And everybody wanted to know, will this man make it?
Ce la
Back
farà?
outside the cave, someone new enters the scene. Lieutenant Robert Burden, a thin but strong 33-year-old Louisville firefighter. Like Miller, he was able to navigate the passages of the cave and brave the squeeze.
Oh,
Scratched up pretty good and drenched in cold, muddy water, he managed to get through. He grabbed the rope and confidently lowered himself to Floyd's position. It
attenzione.
was not an optimistic sight. Floyd's condition was deteriorating.
Well, we've got a heck of a problem here, but I think I can get you out with a rope.
Floyd nods in approval.
Go on.
We might just pull your bloody leg off.
Just pull my leg off then. Get me out of here.
Burden returned to the surface and faced the crowd. He announced,
We will attempt a rope pull.
the crowd murmured. It was dangerous.
Ma
It would
scusami.
certainly break his foot and could altogether pull it off. If there are jagged rocks, you'll fill it, the poor man. Amongst the crowd, a doctor stepped forward. A rope pull could stretch his internal organs and cause them to rupture. You'll kill him. But Floyd is dying of exposure down there. The situation is becoming desperate. Burden put caution to the side.
The time for strategy is over. Now we try brute force.
Oh mamma mia, questa roba finirà malissimo. Malissimo. Ma poi scusami, con che angolo lo tirano? The time of strategy never started, davvero? Lui è delirante ormai. Lui è totalmente delirante, dai. Guarda. Se non fosse che siamo al minuto 26 di 1 ora e 9, direi che gli strappano il busto e le gambe restano per terra. Ma non è quello che succederà, evidentemente.
Floyd, we're here. We're gonna get you out of here.
After 79 hours in the cold water, he is delirious, fading in and out of consciousness. Homer gave his brother some coffee and fed him a couple of ham sandwiches. That warms him up and gives him a bit more energy, and he comes back to lucidity.
Oh, much better.
I'm
Ok.
gonna put the special harness around you. Burden and Miller, they're here too. We got 3 more boys right up the cave, and they're all ready to pull as hard as they can to get you out of here.
Floyd was
Siamo all'80ª ora. Non gli hanno ancora dato dell'acqua. Caffè a profusione. Dell'acqua. Si usa.
frightened.
I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna hurt.
He gave his brother some whiskey and a strong sedative to calm his
Whiskey.
nerves, and also to help him withstand the shock in case his foot is destroyed. Floyd took the opportunity
acqua.
to appreciate being surrounded by friends and family.
Go on. Do it.
All right, strap him up.
Homer tied the harness around Colin's chest
Whisky e
and knotted the
sedativi.
rope.
Ready?
Above,
Whisky e sedativi. Cioè, 1925, ragazzi. Abbiate pazienza. Diciamo che se proprio, ma non se ne sapete di medicina, proprio se avete anche solo preso un'aspirina una volta, un Tachiflu, qualsiasi cosa, proprio alcolici in generale, whisky e medicina, non consigliatissimo, ecco, non ditelo al vostro medico di base, potrebbe avere delle controindicazioni, non bene.
Miller is crouched at the top of the pit.
Ready?
Burden clenches the cord from further up the cave.
3,
The rope goes taut.
2,
Mamma, finirà malissimo sta roba.
1.
Oh!
Instinctively, Floyd gasps. The force of 6 men pulled against the clutches of the cave. Floyd began to scream. His body was being pulled up from the rubble. The gravel was beginning to shift. Burden clenched his teeth.
Oh, harder!
Floyd screamed harder as well. Now, Floyd was trapped in a supine position, but the direction of the rope caused an upwards force that wrenched him vertically. His torso
E infatti è letteralmente quello che stavo dicendo prima, è la prima cosa che ho immaginato. Ho detto, ma in che direzione lo pullano se non c'è un dritto? Lo tirano verso l'alto. Ma porco...
was being compressed and bent against the ceiling of the trap. It would kill him. Floyd's screaming intensified.
Lo ammazzano, lo
and through
ammazzano.
gasps was begging them to stop. The screams filled the echoing cave, but it did not stop. The agony continued. On and on, with no progress.
Enough! Enough! You guys are killing him!
Homer pulled in the
said
opposite
stop.
direction to give his brother some reprieve. Somehow, Homer mustered the strength to altogether wrench the cord from the other men's hands. The rope went slack. Homer, Floyd, and the rope lay limp on the cave floor, panting and exhausted. No progress had been made.
80ª ora, no progress.
The cave would not let this man go. The futility of the situation sank in, and all they could do was leave for now and reassess. Everybody was shaken by the experience. Burden fainted as he crawled towards the exit. Most of the other men had to be carried away. Outside, the crowd had grown to 200. They buzzed and asked useless questions, and Homer walked dejectedly past them. He sat by thinking what he could do. The cause seemed hopeless.
Homer?
Then, someone showed up who could turn things around.
Budilicious!
He went off to see a childhood friend of both his and Floyd's, Johnny Gerald.
Incredibile, Budi!
Gerald knew more about cave rescues than most. In fact, just that summer prior, he had helped untangle
Leroy!
Floyd from a different snag. He was just the man for the job.
All right, let me go see him. Well, look who it is.
Floyd perked up immediately,
Yay.
thrilled to see Gerald.
All right, let's see what we can do.
Gli propone una Kaizo! 100%!
Gerald jumped down. For the next 3 hours, Gerald went back to the original plan of prying away rocks. His stamina was good.
No, dai, però. Ma non ci stanno neanche provando, però, Cioè, posso dire, senza offesa, capisco che non erano studiati in 1925, vabbè, 82 ore. Mago vero questo. Geraldo è uno duro, aspetta. Ho capito, Zeff, allora, senza fare mezzi spoiler. Cioè, 82 ore siamo ancora a scavare a mano. Siamo tornati allo scavare a mano dopo 82 ore. Mi sembra ci vuole qualcosina di più, non dico tanto. Un attrezzino, una leva. Cercare di spostare il masso dal piede. Qualcosa.
And progress was surprisingly good as well. For several more hours, he continued, just moving stone after stone. New one would fall in its place, and he'd move that one too. By midnight, he had enough room to shift position and clear some of the gravel that was at each side of Floyd's body. Gerald would spend several more hours scooping. And it worked. For the first time, Floyd's torso was now available. Then his hips, his upper thigh.
What the fuck? Ma com'è possibile? Ma saranno 2 tonnellate di sassi questi. Ma come?
For the first time in over 90 hours, Floyd was able to wiggle his arms, his hips, and even that trapped right leg, though it was very painful to do. In that one session, Gerald managed to move a half-ton of rock.
What the What? What? 500 kg... Cosa? Budilicious, mago vero. Ora e per sempre. Mezza tonnellata di sassi?
Still a lot more to go. And that rock by his foot was still holding him in place. By 2 a.m., Gerald was spent.
Sì, però
he needed
non...
rest. And he was ready to
Anche
head
con
back
mezza tonnellata non è che...
Floyd, tomorrow, you're gonna be a free man.
Libero
Now,
domani.
he might think that things will become straightforward. They did not. Now that that space had been cleared, Burden became convinced that if he could get down that passage again, he could free Floyd with another rope pull. Fate decided with both feet or just one. But when Burden tried to enter the cave again, he was sternly rebuffed by the locals.
Fermatelo!
They were playing gatekeeper. They had been specifically instructed to not let anyone in, and they were especially opposed to Burden making another rope pull after word spread about the disaster of
Ma
the first attempt.
fermatelo!
He tried to reason with them.
Let me try the rope pull again. It'll
Ma
work this time.
basta,
They
non è
wouldn't give up.
vero!
Instead, they shouted obscenities and shoved him in the other direction.
Guarda lì le foto di repertorio. Guarda lì le foto di repertorio. Minchia, the fucking mob, veramente. Tutti lì.
Meanwhile, Gerald and Homer are incapacitated with exhaustion, and Miller was busy filing some paperwork for the Louisville Courier. Nobody else had the ability or the authority to take action, so Floyd spent all of that morning alone.
Hello? Is
Hello?
anyone there? Help? Hey.
100ª ora.
Word spread about Floyd. Miller's reporting had been picked up by the AP Newswire, and they distributed it amongst their hundreds of partnered newspapers. For Miller, it would be the biggest moment of his career. But he didn't stop to pay it mind. He spent the day hatching a rescue plan. Miller descended into the cave and set to work. When he entered, he found that the team before him had strung light bulbs all through the cavern, leading all the way down to Floyd. Very handy. A bulb was also put around Floyd's neck to keep him warm and make sure that he was never again left in the dark. Miller...
Perché ci vogliono 100 ore? Come fa a non essere la prima cazzo di cosa che ti viene in mente? La prima! Una lista di necessità. Come la prima cazzo di cosa? Come fa a non essere quello? Perché 100 ore? Meglio tardi che mai. Ma... boh. Gli hanno data dell'acqua nel frattempo o stanno continuando a dargli il caffè?
Miller popped down to Floyd.
Ah, Floyd, fancy seeing you here, buddy.
Reusing that syrup tin, he started offloading gravel into buckets. Those buckets were then passed up and down the cavern. And so it went on for the next 2 hours. Miller stopped for a break. He took some bread, milk, and whiskey. And sharing it with Floyd, they started to get...
Cos'è che gli hanno dato?
Floyd. The cavern. And so it went on for the next 2 hours. Miller stopped for a break. He took some bread, milk, and whiskey.
Pane, latte e whisky. Dell'acqua! Posso avere dell'acqua? Sono incastrato da 103 ore. Sotto i sassi posso avere dell'acqua. Per piacere. Non può essere così difficile. Boh.
And sharing it with Floyd, they started to get to talking. Floyd had been in that cave for over 100 hours now. And seeing everyone working together,
Mamma mia.
Floyd was overcome with a sense
Sono
of
stato
hope
anch'io in America,
and relief.
Flowerson, ho capito,
and so
però...
he began spilling his heart out to Miller.
E qua c'è la
Here
qua
is
c'è...
what he is quoted in the newspaper.
Ok, quindi qua... E questo è il motivo per cui sappiamo tutti sti dettagli, perché c'è stato effettivamente un momento dove si sono raccontati tutto, ecco.
I believed I would go to heaven. I can feel
Un liquorino non ha mai fatto male a nessuno.
and with both my feet. I kept thinking, what would happen if the rock above me would fall? It caused me to shudder. I kept thinking to drive my mind to something else, but it wasn't much use. I couldn't do much to help those who came to help me, but I knew that a lot of people were willing to do all in their power. It gave me courage. Tuesday morning, I thought to myself, 4 days down here, and no nearer freedom than I was on the first day. How will it end? Will I get out? I couldn't think of it. I have faced death before. It doesn't frighten me, but it is so long.
Speed, puoi immaginare benissimo cosa stia succedendo per quanto riguarda pisciazza e cacozza. Cioè, puoi immaginare benissimo cosa stia succedendo. Se la sta facendo addosso tutte e due. La pozza d'acqua in cui è a bagno, ragazzi, è sicuramente anche piscio. Poco da fa.
Tell them I am not going to give up. Tell them I'm going to fight and be patient and never forget them.
Sbrà! Sì, vero.
Meanwhile, Floyd's story kept growing. Pedestrians would gather around corner store windows to read the latest bulletins. The press began using giant typefaces, commonly only reserved for declarations of war. Churches in all of the nearby counties were holding services for Floyd. Theaters even interrupted their shows to update the audience. Now, at the time, President Coolidge was in charge, and his Secretary of Commerce was a geologist, Herbert Hoover. Now, Mr. Hoover followed the story very closely.
Siamo arrivati al presidente degli Stati Uniti d'America.
And so, it was likely that the president did too. Even Congress paused session to ask about the latest news from Sand Cave.
What
By
the
the end,
fuck?
The Floyd Collins incident would explode into the third largest non-political story between World War I.
Third largest non-political story. What the fuck? Enorme. Ma allora arrivano i soldi. Arrivano le truppe.
And World War II. All of this excitement brought an inundation of people to Cave City. Old population, 690. Yawn. New population, 10,000. Hotels ran out of food. Residents turned their homes into makeshift hotels, charging sizable premiums to let people nap in their bathtubs.
Oh my god!
The banks quickly ran out of on-hand cash, and 4,500 automobiles impatiently sat backed up for 2 miles from 20 different states to drive onto the Collins farm and turn their pristine green pastures into swampy parking lots. Deep below all those tourists, there's Miller, trying to free Floyd.
Wow!
Right, a little bit of setup. Floyd, Miller, some remaining rubble, rock. For anyone to lift the rock by hand would be impossible because Floyd's body obstructs the hole. Miller grabs a crowbar and shoves it through the gap. Now he's going to lever it off Floyd's foot. Cool. The crowbar is now wedged against the rock. Next, he takes a jack. He positions it on top of the crowbar so that it will be forced against the ceiling. However, problem. That jack is too big. It doesn't fit. Miller yells up the tunnel for a smaller one, but this took some time. And when it arrived, too small, won't reach the ceiling. But instead of sending for another one, Miller takes 2 blocks of wood and bolsters them underneath the crowbar. Right, so the crowbar now sits higher, it fulcrums against the blocks, and the jack is sitting on top.
MacGyver!
All Miller has to do is expand the jack, which he will do using this spanner, holding it at the very tips of his fingers. Sounds easy. It's not.
Sounds easy? No, comunque. Non sounds easy. Decisamente no. Wow. Finalmente una buona idea? Ma non funziona mai questa roba, ma stai scherzando? Non ci credo. Guarda, non ci credo. Non ci credo che questo sistema qui possa funzionare. Quei pezzi di legno non tengono niente. Impossibile, non ci credo. Non ci credo mai.
Let's get him out of there. He turned the wrench. The jack expanded, and the crowbar took strain. The whole thing slid apart with a pang. Floyd wasn't hurt, but Miller was contorting and exerting his whole body from back to fingertip. They tried again. Same result. Miller tried a new
Mamma mia,
angle.
Yuki, grazie
Maybe this
mille.
time.
Grazie degli 8 mesi.
The jack
Mwah.
pressed. The tension increased. And this time, the rock moved. It fucking moved. With each turn, the stone shifted a little more.
Cosa?
Miller's hands shook with adrenaline, his face and body dripping with sweat. Pang. One of the blocks slipped, and the wooden tower went sideways. The rock painfully slammed back down on Colin's foot.
You'll get it next time, Miller. Try again.
Miller did. Again. And again. Adding blocks, taking them away, new crowbar position, changed the jack position, every angle, all while Floyd was there, cheering him on.
Yay!
For the next 4 hours he tried.
Ma scusate, tra l'altro, no? Altra cosa. Sempre per un elenco di stronzate che erano da fare all'inizio, che anche per la tecnologia e lo studiato del 1925 a me sembrano ovvi. Ma sto tizio sta nell'acqua. Ma una cannuccia, cioè letteralmente un qualsiasi cosa per evitare che questo coglione sia nell'acqua da 120 ore a morire di freddo. Tirarlo su in qualche modo. No. Così, steso, basta. Un cuscino, niente.
No
Una
progress.
pompetta per levare
Miller
l'acqua,
was
ce l'avevano.
exhausted. He couldn't do this on his own, but he was the only one slim enough to get in through the gap. The group decided to concede for now and return to the surface. They would take just
Dai,
a small
Zeff, è un
break,
tubo, i
but it
tubi
looked
ce
to everyone
l'avevano.
like there was a clear way to get this man out. So Miller and Burden crawl back
Belli
through the mud
incazzati,
and the
guardali lì.
winds of the cave. As they made their way through, the cave was visibly sagging. The ceiling seemed lower. Parts were harder to navigate than before, especially now with their bruised and purple hands. But they made it outside to the fresh, early morning air.
Cioè, sempre perché c'è gente fuori, eccetera, eccetera, e il calore, come dicevano all'inizio, all'ingresso, si sta rovinando la cava.
And here is where they're greeted with a new sight. Dozens of soldiers.
Soldati, è arrivato!
Had arrived. In addition to the National Guard, a new figure was joining the story. Henry Carmichael. Now, Carmichael was the general superintendent.
Carmichael è sempre il nome di un super fregno, di un generale incredibile. Non è un nome, capito? Carmichael non è uno stronzo che non ce la fa. Carmichael è uno... enorme!
The Kentucky Rock Asphalt Company. He had been on site since Tuesday, and he was appalled at how primitive the rescue attempts had been. Shortly after Miller and Co. had exited, Carmichael sent 2 men into Sand Cave to assess the structure's stability. They soon came back with a report. It was not good. Near the final squeeze, large cracks had formed. The ceiling was beginning to droop. Alright, so the following is a recounting of events from one of Carmichael's men, Casey Jones. Casey and another worker spent about an hour in the cave, surveying its condition, looking at the boards, the ceiling, the stability of the walls. He continued deeper towards Floyd. He was fighting against his nerves. The shifting of the rock pinged his every instinct to flee. But he heard Collins moaning ahead, so he pushed himself on. He managed to make it through the squeeze and he arrived at the 10-foot pit. Seeing Floyd trapped, he tried to ignore the pebbles that were tumbling behind him.
Please, come down.
I can't right now, Floyd, but I will when I get back.
Behind Casey, his partner is begging to leave. Below Casey, Collins is pleading for help.
Please, I'm so thirsty.
Okay.
Casey slid.
I'm so thirsty! 120 ore, gli ho dato solo il caffè! Certo che c'hai
Head
sete!
first into the pit and hastily ladled Floyd some coffee. But Floyd...
Non ci credo! No! Di nuovo! Basta!
Okay.
Casey slid headfirst into the pit and hastily ladled Floyd some coffee. But Floyd rejected it. Rumbling intensified from above. And in that moment, Casey realized that this was not a plea for sustenance. Floyd knew that a cave-in was inevitable. Scared and approaching his 5th day trapped, he was completely at his wit's end. He knew he was about to be trapped in that cave. And he didn't want to be trapped alone.
For God's sake, Casey, come on, you'll get us killed.
Stay with me, please. Don't leave.
Casey looked into Colin's eyes, set the coffee down, and pulled himself out of the pit. He wiggled underneath the sagging ceiling and crawled towards the turnaround room as fast as his limbs could scramble against the cave walls. He looked back to see the passage closing like a maw. Reflections from the bulb shining around Floyd's neck were no longer visible. Instead, just sobs could be heard, muffled from behind the rocks.
Siamo non a punto a capo, siamo messi peggio.
Miller and Burden awoke in the late morning, confident that today would be the day that they saved Floyd. They had some new equipment too. Some wire to wrap around the wooden blocks to prevent them from slipping. And they changed their mind about that acetylene torch. They'll use it to burn away 2 rocks that had previously blocked their way. But when Miller got to the turnaround room, all of that optimism left him. The entrance to the squeeze was now just a pile of debris.
Mamma mia.
Miller froze, staring at it for a long while. Then he sighed and did the only thing he could think, attempt to move some of the stones. But each adjustment led to more rocks just tumbling down and landing in that space. He persisted until... crash. A large chunk of clay landed onto his feet. Recognizing the danger, Miller returned to the surface. 15 minutes later, he emerged from the cave with a bloodied-up nose and bruises down his back and shoulders. Burden caught sight and races over to him. Miller just says, "For God's sake, just don't let Homer or anyone else back in there." Now, he didn't actually need to worry about Homer going.
Lui ha ancora... Vabbè che è una ricostruzione con una faccia di un attore a caso, ma lui ha ancora la faccia di uno che vorrebbe fare un rope pull! Forza!
Back in there because he was sidelined with illness. But he did, however, need to worry about Gerald because he was furious. Gerald had warned
incazzato
everyone
nero!
that putting dozens of people in Sand Cave would cause a collapse. It certainly did. The rest of that day would be wasted as men threw blame around and screamed at each other about how to handle the cave-in. And Floyd spent the rest of that day alone.
Merda. Tutto il giorno. Ma Gesù.
The surveyors continued checking the cave throughout the day. By the evening, Carmichael had ordered everyone to an assembly. Gerald took the floor. He was going to try one last daring rescue. He boldly announced his plan and an ultimatum.
Listen up. There's death down there. The walls and ceilings are crumbling. Unless you're determined to take the biggest chance you ever took in your life, tell me now and stay outside.
Cristo santo.
They told all the Gawkers to get the fuck out of the cave, clear off. And over the next 8 hours, Gerald would enter and leave Sand Cave at least 5 times, chipping away at that pile of debris. In the woods, men sawed trees and chopped logs to shore up the cave walls. Underground, the crew reinforced cracks and wobbling boulders with fresh...
Esatto! È quello che dicevo prima! 128! Come ora 128? È la prima cosa! Anche nel 1925 deve essere la prima cosa! Ma come? Una settimana per pensare... Ah, ma sai che dovremmo evitare che crolli il resto? Boh!
Strips of wood. Gerald assessed that about 4 barrels of rocks would need to be moved, and piece by piece, they made that happen. Steadily, they managed to move enough rock to allow Gerald
Siamo
to
in
get within
Kentucky che ci vuoi
earshot
fare?
of
Ma
Floyd.
porca puttana!
Hello? I need food.
Bad news. We can't reach you. But hold on. We're coming.
Stone by stone, they continued. After a few hours, the light of the bulb around Floyd's neck was peeking through. A couple more hours, enough room for Gerald to squeeze through.
Okay, that's enough. Floyd, I'm going for now. But when I get back, I'm gonna get you out of there.
Exhausted but still determined, Gerald crawled back up the cave and marched to the men huddling
Musica di
outside.
Elden Ring sotto.
Gather the equipment, and in an hour's time, it's gonna be me and Floyd coming out of that cave.
Gerald entered Sand Cave for his final time.
Non ci credo mai.
The walls had been reinforced, but mud and water was accumulating everywhere. He waded through it and pressed on past the danger of the sagging ceiling. With determination on his face and a grease gun clutched in his right hand, he scrambled towards Floyd. But before the final squeeze, he stopped. It was all gone. The cave ceiling had crumbled once again. Gerald stared motionlessly at the pile. Then he began to yell.
Floyd!
A rock disconnected from the ceiling and tumbled onto Gerald's head. Luckily, just a small one. He rubbed his scalp and called out again.
Floyd!
This time, a moan. It rumbled from the other side. Fearing that his friend was slipping out of consciousness, Gerald willed himself against the cave, launching the debris behind him with force. He ignored the pain from being struck on the head and clawed at the stone pile. He carried on this way for several minutes, until a sharp, heavy rock dropped from the ceiling and landed squarely on his back. No more than 15 minutes later, Gerald returned to the surface, defeated.
Bootylicious! Dead!
Only after the cave-ins did they start to think about all of the things that they could have done.
Wait, why didn't we rig a portable telephone line? That would have...
142 ore dopo? Sai cosa avremmo potuto fare?
I mean, incredibly simple here in 1925. Yeah, why have we been running in and out to deliver updates?
Why didn't we give him an AM radio? He could have had something to listen to and receive messages of support from the public.
Wait, why don't we rig up a tarpaulin so we could lift his torso up so he wouldn't be slowly dying of exposure?
Esatto! Esatto!
Oh God, why didn't we run a feeding tube? That's also a technology we have in 1925.
All too late. Now what? The one route to get to Floyd is closed forever.
Che
That meant
fastidio!
two options. Number one, capitulation.
48, come 48? Cos'altro deve succedere? È morto lui, dai. Lei è andato, ragazzi. Probabilità che Floyd sia vivo, 0. 0% adesso. Però, come fanno a esserci altri... Come fa a esserci un'altra mezz'ora di plot twist qua?
Surrender him to the cave.
Questa è la coda.
Well, number two, dig down from directly above Floyd. Now, the prospect of digging from above seemed almost fanciful. At least, it did in the beginning. But luckily, they had some help. Owing to Miller's reporting, Floyd had become practically the most famous person in the country. The rescue had become a high priority for the governor of Kentucky. Lieutenant General Denhart enters the scene. He's been updated on the situation, and following shortly behind him is a small army of miners and engineers. He declared to the despondent crowd, "Gentlemen, I am here on behalf of the governor. The purse strings of Kentucky are open. Take this blank check and bring that man out alive."
Woo!
Floyd, in that cold, wet confine, could not have imagined the scale of the operation that was
È arrivato
going
il
on 55 feet above him.
potenziamento!
Authorities assumed control of Colin's rescue.
Zio, i soldi, zio!
Denhart gave Henry Carmichael the lead to dig, and Carmichael raced to get to work. He enlisted his employees, his fleet of expensive high-tech machinery. Professional groups were brought in from all across the state. Local townspeople were mostly excluded, and for the first time since Collins had been trapped, work was now about to go ahead in a systematic manner. Everyone knew the plan.
Ora 144 però. Ma come 144? È troppo. 144, ragazzi. Sono 6 giorni, raga. E lui comunque non mangia, non beve da 119? Dalla 119esima, che è l'ultima volta che c'è andato Collins, che gli ha dato il caffè. È il caffè. Di nuovo. Quindi sarà un giorno intero che non mangia. E non beve.
Everyone had something to do, and everyone was working fast. But just as hopes were rising, they were once again dashed against the rocks.
No.
They had all of this state-of-the-art machinery shipped in and assembled by the engineers and rearing to go. And it was all worthless. See, the problem is, the cave drew air into it. These diesel-powered engines pumped out enormous volumes of choking exhaust. Within a day's operation, the cave would be filled with carbon monoxide, and Floyd would be dead from asphyxiation. Just as quickly as solutions would arise, the cave would parry them away. It refused to let this man go. So engineers and miners had wasted hours assembling everything, only to realize that they had to pack it all up and cart it away. Because the digging of a 55-foot shaft would be done with picks and shovels.
Sì, 2 settimane. Più ti avvicini, più si fa di merda il terreno. Dov'hai?
But he knew a lot about quarrying. And he estimated that his team of 75 volunteers could dig and dredge at a rate of 2 feet per hour.
Però 70 persone. Ok, aspetta. 70 persone sono di più di quelle che avevo messo in conto io, effettivamente. Ok. Maybe 3 metri all'ora? No. Fax. 0,61 metri. C'è scritto. 0,61 metri per ogni ora. Vabbè, dai. Non è terribile come stima. Un altro giorno, fondamentalmente.
If they worked around the clock, they would be digging directly into the spot where Floyd lays within 30 hours.
Sì.
Now, is it possible that Floyd could survive for another 30 hours?
Sì.
Absolutely. Let's go. The first ton was moved, and at first, it was easy work. Just dirt and clay. Carmichael understood well that this was a race against time, so he watched the men closely, and if they seemed to be slowing down, even a little, they would be yanked out, and immediately a new worker subbed in. Nonetheless, the pace slowed. By 10 feet, the shaft narrowed greatly, which meant that only 2 men could work at a time. At 15 feet, they hit boulders. Pickaxes went in, and a system of pulleys and buckets had to be used to cart the rock
morto,
out.
dai, è morto.
Tracks were even laid to ferry the refuse to a dump site. Time passed. Hours passed. Night went to day. The day was hot. This was yet another problem, because it's early February, there's tons of ice still in the ground, and its exposure to the fresh midday sun meant that the walls of the shaft were softening and the ground becoming sodden. The pace of digging slowed. It was now only half a foot per hour.
Cosa?
Most anyone...
Half a foot per hour. Sono 15 centimetri. 15 centimetri per ogni ora. Una settimana ci vuole. Una settimana.
One could do
È
was
morto.
watch helplessly on the sidelines and pray. Interestingly, though, there were a lot of people on the
È
sidelines.
morto. Nonostante
Floyd
tutta
wouldn't have believed that the
sto
space above him had
sforzo,
turned into a
eccetera, fucking
literal
dead.
carnival in his honor. Vendors showed up to sell hamburgers, hot dogs, and souvenirs. Families sprawled out over blankets to listen
Cosa?
to hymns from local church groups. The local mountebanks sold moonshine and miracle cures. There was even a bloody juggler. And Old Man Lee was there, walking around, shaking his jar, and soliciting donations. But where were Homer and Burden and Miller during all of this?
Quanto americano. Quanto è americano il carnival attorno alla grotta del morto. Comunque il personaggio peggiore di tutta questa storia è il padre di quel figlio. Veramente, il padre di Floyd è veramente un pezzo di merda, ubriacone del cazzo. Veramente terribile. Che personaggio orrendo. Cristo.
Okay, let's back up a bit. People did not properly understand exactly how Floyd was trapped, and the news didn't help much either.
Oh, attenzione, i complottari!
So the obvious question started to arise.
Ecco, è quello che mancava a questa storia. I complottari. Ah, adesso lì si fanno i soldi. Magari neanche c'è. Magari Floyd neanche c'è laggiù in fondo a quella cava. Lo hanno fatto per i soldi. Mo' arrivano. C'è. Ma guarda, se non lo dicono, ci metto 300 subgift, guarda. Lo dicono al 100% questo.
Why hasn't he been rescued yet? Just clear some gravel or pull a rope. How is this so hard?
Vero?
Motive was attributed.
I heard they didn't even want to have him rescued at all.
I heard that they're doing all of this for publicity.
And Lee's activity of soliciting donations, remember from before, further inflamed rumors.
I bet Floyd isn't even trapped in there.
These were all real rumors, and they got worse.
You know what? I've heard he comes out at night, and then he just goes back in the morning.
Other rumors included...
I heard that after...
Esce di notte e torna a stendersi lì di giorno. Cosa devo sentire?
Floyd went into the cave, someone murdered him.
Others said...
I think they're withholding food and water from him so he dies.
This whole thing is a fraud.
As time went on, it was harder and harder to ignore the hoax claims. Then, people started to form righteous mobs, claiming the whole thing was a fraud, and they started to get nasty. In fact, 2 people even went to the telegraph office and pretended to be Floyd, sending telegrams to his mother. Here's what it said. Quote, "Please contradict statements that I am buried alive in sand cave. Stop. Tell mother I am all right. Stop. Am coming home. Stop. Floyd Collins." Naturally, the AP published these telegrams unquestioningly, and now word is out to the press that he isn't actually in the cave after all. That made the authorities look foolish, and it could not go on. So, a hasty court-martial was arranged, and Homer, Miller, and Gerald were summoned. They hold one session on Monday and another on Tuesday. Lee and everyone else is cleared of charges. A retraction is written, and things carry on. Generators rumbled. Pumps churned out water. Men continued working in shifts and carrying away.
No, aspetta. Ha fatto un fast forward allucinante. 228. Come 228? 228 vuol dire che lui non mangia e non beve da 100 ore. E sono a 24 feet. Ma lo trovano, non è che lo trovano morto. Morto è morto già da giorni. Lo trovano totalmente decomposto.
The earth. Here they are with strips of lumber to shore up the walls. They were only 25 feet down. The pace had slowed to 4 inches per hour. In their desperation, they resorted to dynamite. But this did little to the boulders. Despite...
La dinamite contro i massi. Ma che gli vuoi fare? Mamma mia, mamma mia. Ma è il 1925, ragazzi. Non è... Cioè, capisco che sia 100 anni fa. D'accordo. Ma non è neanche la preistoria, però. Cioè, sono veramente stupidi come il cazzo. Ma veramente stupidi. Porca troia.
All these bleak circumstances, people's spirits were high. Because everyone was keen for their turn to dig. And because they had one more thing to latch onto. He is probably still alive.
E che cazzo ne sai?
Now, how do they know that?
Infatti.
Okay, so remember that light bulb around Floyd's neck? Well, it's powered by a simple copper wire. Bare copper wire is subject to very minute fluctuations in resistance. So, an engineer rigs up a radio amplifier to this wire to read the current and see those small fluctuations.
What?
There they were.
Il battito del cuore.
About 20 per minute. The rate of steady breathing. As his chest expands and contracts, they can read it from this device. And so, they kept going.
Cosa? Wow! Cioè... Cosa? Madonna, Floyd, motherfucker! Incredibile quanto regge. Ma dico io, cioè questi... Mamma mia, guarda. Cioè, non le idee basilari, non la roba più facile del pianeta, quello no. Ma un filo di rame per reggergli, per vedere se respira a chilometri di distanza, quello sì. Io sono... Caffè e whisky al posto dell'acqua, però poi riusciamo a inventarci un sistema del 3600 per quanto è avanzato per vedere se è ancora vivo o meno. E comunque il tizio c'ha la pellaccia dura, eh? Porca puttana. Sì, vabbè, ho capito.
And going. And going.
Ma dai, ora 288, la madonna. Che cazzo di giorno è? 288 sono... Ma cosa sono? 14 giorni?
30 hours was the original estimate.
Sì,
Now,
dico, adesso sono
104
12. Adesso sono 12. Tempo che finiscono sono almeno 14-15 giorni. Ma va.
4 hours had come and gone, and they were only at 44 feet. Then, rain fell. Rain that mixed with dirt to make mud, much of which then froze to make ice. Ice which expanded and damaged the integrity of the shaft walls. Slowing down with every hour, they continued. Many more hours passed.
Ma tutta sta fatica e poi mi fai sto skip. Mi fai sto skip da 228 a 360 nel giro di un minuto.
Rain fell. Rain that mixed with dirt to make mud, much of which then froze to make ice. Ice which expanded and damaged the integrity of the shaft walls. Slowing down with every hour, they continued.
360.
Many more hours passed, and they were getting close. But it was now 15 days since Floyd was first stuck in that cave, and people had mostly lost hope. That excitement in the newspapers was tempering down. Visitors began clearing out from Cave City. Many still held on to...
Vedi che anche nel 1925, nonostante la gente si annoiasse a morte ancora più di oggi, anche lì te ne frega il primo giorno, il secondo giorno, il terzo giorno, poi storia vecchia.
Hope, but their final lifeline, that light bulb, had burnt out, and it wasn't possible to do any more readings on the radio amplifier without it. No one knew if Floyd was still alive.
Ma che no one knew? Ma dai!
Another 51 hours would pass before...
Voilà, ciao.
Finally, they reached the 60-foot depth.
Lì.
I'm in. Chisel.
A chisel is handed down. At 1:30 p.m. on Monday, February 16th, Sand Cave would open once again. For 17 days, Floyd had been trapped underground, stuck in the same position.
Ma sì, ma non mangia e non beve da...
without heat or light. 12 without food or water.
Ma va.
But maybe the dripping of the cave water had provided him with some sustenance? There are stories of people surviving harsher extremes. Rescuers frantically tugged at rocks to widen the hole. Everybody stood by.
Non ci credo mai.
Into that hole. Ed flashed his light into the gap.
Mai.
Eased himself in.
Morto.
Brenner aimed his light around the room, and then, finally, at Floyd. The first thing he saw was a golden shimmer. It was not the light bulb. It was the reflection of Floyd's tooth. His mouth hung open. He was dead. Brenner was helped out of the cave and he delivered the news.
Dead.
A coroner would later state that Floyd succumbed to exposure and that they had missed him by just 3 days.
What?
About the same time that the light bulb had gone out.
What? Ha resistito quasi 10 giorni. Senza cibo, senza acqua. Un matto. Mannaggia, mi fa rosicare ancora di più.
With the body, the shaft walls were ready to fall inwards, and risking lives to remove a corpse was seen as just irresponsible. So the following morning, officials made a decision. Floyd would be entombed where he lay. The cave would keep its victim.
Non l'ha lasciata andare davvero,
with the family, but what could they do? The next day, they planned the funeral. The town emptied of people, and the shaft with Floyd at the bottom was refilled with soil. But that's not quite the end of the story.
Come fanno a esserci altri 10 minuti di plot twist? È morto. È morto. Fine. Come fa a non essere fine? Come fa... Che ci sta in questi 10 minuti?
If you hung on for this long, keep holding on, because things are going to continue to get interesting. But first, let me do a wrap-up of where everyone is and all that stuff. Context. The Collins family already had financial hardship. Locals saw Old Man Lee scouring the rescue site for glass bottles. But the owner of the land, B. Doyle, and supposed friend of Floyd, was wholly unsympathetic. He erected a sign on the highway which said, 200 yards away, the body of Floyd Collins is imprisoned in Sand Cave. Then he began charging tourists 50 cents apiece for the opportunity to gander into the hole. It's 100 years later, B's dead. Let's call it even. Also, remember those claims of Kentucky being an open purse? Well, the state reneged on the deal. They refused to pay many of the rescuers, and most of them went home without any compensation. Some of them did make some money out of the situation, though. They lucked into vaudeville gigs and roamed the country, giving their first-person account. Miller, however, received an astonishing offer, a $50,000 contract from the Chautauqua.
Sono $810.000 convertiti a oggi. Sono $810.000.
Lecture circuit, equivalent to the better part of $1 million in today's money. He declined. He continued to work at the Louisville Courier
Mamma
Journal.
mia!
Following
Che Chad! Ma che Chaddone è Miller? Chaddone incredibile! $1 milione! No!
year, his coverage of Floyd's story earned him the Pulitzer Prize. Now the brother, Homer, he needed money and he agreed to do that vaudeville circuit. He stood on stage and regaled the audience about tales of his brother, their childhood, and the tragedy. But Homer made it known why he was up here on stage trying to get money. He had a mission.
I kept thinking of Floyd lying in the muck, where he had suffered beyond our power to imagine. I would never have peace of mind if he remained there.
He wanted the money to dig Floyd up and get him out of that cave.
Certo.
A couple of months later, he had it. Alright, so back to Floyd. April 17th, 1925. 7 miners showed up to the scene. They began to dig. Within a week, they had arrived at Floyd. And this time, they approached from the other side of the rock formation. That way, they could remove the rock pinning Floyd's leg. They lifted him up from his tomb and laid him down on the fresh air.
Finalmente.
April 26th, 1925. Floyd was set to rest in the family cemetery. A stalagmite had been set as a headstone to mark out his plot. And there he lay. No, that's not actually where it ends. Okay, this is where it gets weird. 2 years later, 1927. Times have been tough for the Collins. So Floyd's dad sold Sand Cave to a dentist named Dr. Harry B. Thomas for $10,000. Now, Homer begged him not to, because at the time, the government was starting to buy up tons of land in the area and turn it into national parks. They had to pay at a very competitive rate. But Lee was becoming a bit old and senile by this point, and frankly, it's doubtful that he cared about Homer or Floyd or anyone else for that matter. It's 100 years later, he's dead now, let's call it even. So, the point is, in this land sale with Thomas, Lee agreed to a very odd clause. And that clause said, everything on that property belongs to Thomas. And should he wish, for example, to exhume a dead body and re-embalm it and put it on display in something really tacky like a glass coffin inside a cave, maybe, then that would be his prerogative. Lee signed yes. And Thomas...
Madonna, l'ho detto o no, che era il personaggio peggiore di questa storia. È il padre, il personaggio peggiore di questa storia. È lui, ma si vede. No, dai.
Thomas did exactly that. Doyle made Floyd's corpse a tourist attraction. That's right. 2 bits of gander, come and wonder at the incredible dead man who died in a cave. But to add insult to injury, it worked. Visitors returned to Sand Cave to gawk morbidly at...
Ma il dentista, non il padre. Il padre ha venduto! Il padre ha venduto nonostante le clausole, non gliene fregava un cazzo, voleva bere e morire, basta. E ovviamente uno, pezzo di merda, fa una roba così e viene premiato.
At Floyd. Within a few months, Thomas had turned Lee's failing farm into a successful business.
Guarda lì!
Now, the rest of Colin's family is horrified. They try a number of times to get Floyd returned to them, including through the legal system. But somehow, incredibly, the judge ruled in Thomas's favor. And so, there he lay for the next 2 years.
Guarda lì la bara nella cava, guarda lì.
The cave was not done with Floyd. Until someone hatched a plan. 2 years later, it's midnight, outside Sand Cave. Footsteps can be heard rustling through the brush. Now, we don't know who these two men are, but we know why they are here. To rob a grave. They sneak inside and clamber over the rocks in the darkness. Reaching Floyd's casket, they undo the latch and throw open the lid. There is his shriveled body. They throw him in a gunny sack and they race off into the night. For 800 yards they carry dear Floyd like a couple of sweaty Santas about to deliver a really terrible Christmas present. Panting, out of breath, knowing that they're going to get caught any minute, they reach the Kentucky Green River hillside. There's no time. With a 1, 2, 3, they launch his body towards the river.
Ma porco.
Floyd goes sailing into the air, up, into the starlit beyond,
Ma cosa sto vedendo?
and landing in a bush.
No, no.
The two men flee from the scene. Now, the next morning, Thomas notices that the body of Floyd is somewhat missing, and he contacts the authorities. The police come, they dust the casket for fingerprints, and bloodhounds are given Floyd's scent and let loose into the hillside. A few hours later,
Immagina essere così stronzo da non riuscire a centrare un fiume.
they managed to find him, a tangled up mess near the river, but this time with a leg missing, that same one that was trapped under the rock. So, despite his protest, it had been amputated. Neither the leg nor the culprits were ever found. And while it would be nice to think that this was some well-intentioned duo that did this out of the kindness of their hearts to free Floyd, it's much more likely that it was an act of vandalism because Floyd was simply too much of a hot tourist attraction. The following day, Floyd was cast back into the cave, back into his box.
Madonna,
and
dai,
it was covered by a metal lid, surrounded by a metal chain, and locked with a padlock. He was now more trapped than he had ever been.
Wow! Guarda lì!
This cave had spun fate once again to make sure that its victim would never leave.
Dai,
And
ma
so,
lo tirano fuori, dai.
Time passed. Floyd's body would continue to decay. The rot from his body would eventually rot the casket too, and every decade or so, it would need to be replaced. A few years later, he was no longer on display, but even then, he remained in that box for many more years. In 1961, Floyd's Cave was purchased by Mammoth Cave National Park, and it was closed to the public. There would be no more visitors. The entrance itself to Floyd's Cave was closed with a steel gate and bolted, then welded shut. But the Collins family never gave up objecting to Colin's body being left in the cave. And here is where the story ends. In 1989, at the Collins' request, the National Park Service ventured into Floyd's Cave. Continuing on a more than 60-year tradition, a team of people worked over the course of several days to remove him from the cave. They took him out, left the cave, locked it behind them, and laid Floyd to rest at the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church
Nell'89.
Cemetery. After 64 years in Sand Cave, he is now finally at peace. The end. Thank you to Wendigoon as Floyd.
Madonna
If you
mia.
don't let me out, I'm going to hire a gang of hitmen to come to your house and kill your family.
Samito as Homer.
The BTS meal McDonald's bag that has
I'm
McDonald's
hungry.
and BTS. Shut the fuck up and eat some BTS, bro.
Ordinary Things
Hai detto
as
89, Norman. Scusa, sono stupido? Hai detto 89? 1989, no? Adesso manco me lo carica più. Decisamente meglio di Metropolis, serata ben spesa, madonna, ero. Incredibile. Certo vi metto il link, lo metto per tutti, ma sei matta. Certo, lo metto per tutti. Questo era Man in a Cave di Internet Historian, canale tra l'altro che a prescindere da questo video vi consiglio comunque di seguire perché come vedete lui è un cazzo di genio, lui e il suo team perché non lavora da
Floyd
solo.
sent and let loose following day a metal chain. Fate once
Bla 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 bla. Vediamo qui, ma dovrebbe essere 89 comunque. Ancora 30.000 giocatori, io ne ho 20k. La cosa non è migliorata nel frattempo. Decisamente non è migliorata.
every decade or so, it would need to be replaced.
Ciao,
A few years
Hunter.
later, he was no longer on display. But even then, he remained in that box for many more years. In 1961, Floyd's Cave was purchased by Mammoth Cave National Park, and it was closed to the public. There would be no more visitors. The entrance itself to Floyd's Cave was closed with a steel gate and bolted, then welded shut. But the Collins family never gave up objecting to Collins' body being left in the cave. And here is where the story ends. In 1989, at the Collins' request,
1989, sì,
the
non
National
89,
Park Service
89.
ventured into Floyd's Cave. Continuing on a more than 60-year tradition, a team of people worked over the course of several days to remove him from the cave. They took him out, left the cave, locked it behind them, and laid Floyd to rest at the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church Cemetery. After 64 years in Sand Cave, he is now finally at peace.
Pazzesco. Sono in tempo per vedere una partita? Assolutamente no, Giobbe, perché non ci sono partite. Tra l'altro io di Internet Historian, sappiate che questo è un video di un anno fa, 46 minuti e 48 secondi per raccontare la Costa Concordia. Con nient'altri che lui. Proprio lui.
Come out and start putting on life vests. Staff rally and try to calm.
Proprio
Instalist on
lui.
the port side. Elon, the chief.
Italian Proud Achievement. Già, questo sarebbe da recuperare anche questo, eh. Sarebbe, non adesso, tranquilli, non adesso. Direi che un mattone per ogni sera può bastare, ma Giuseppe, non Giuseppe, Giuseppe Pilon. Giuseppe Pilon è assolutamente da vedere questo.